We got one more guest, one more segment left for this Wednesday edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is with Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number one on Twitter, host on VSiN, and contributor to the Point Spread Weekly newsletter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Adam. How are you, brother?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here. And we'll try to keep this short and sweet. Wes getting over a little bit of dental work there. So still a little bit sore, and we'll try not to have him talking too much here on today's show. But Wes, as far as the college football card here for week 8, as I mentioned in the previous segment, we're more than halfway through the college football season here. Do you start looking ahead to lame duck head coaches, teams that aren't going to make a bowl game, or are we too early for that?
We might be a little too early for that because, we've seen teams, I think every year there's a few teams that do get off to kind of bad starts, and then maybe they played a really tough non-conference, and now they're getting into the conference, and I guess the drop in class. So you can get some of these teams. Now, that's especially, I think, in maybe some of the non-Power Fives where, okay, now we're playing more competition on our level. You know, if you're like a MAC team or Sun Belt or the American Athletic Conference, Mountain West, those type of conferences. Now, the SEC, it's a tough game every week. Or even to some degree in the Big Ten, Rutgers excluded from that. But you pretty much got to come to play every week. So the losses can really, I guess, kind of mount up, if you will.
All right, so we look at a couple of teams here that I don't think they're really where they expected to be. We didn't have a line on this game on Monday when we talked about it with Kyle Hunter on our College Football First Look segment. Well, we've got a line here now. UCLA and Stanford. Stanford, we're starting to see some 6.5s leak out there into the market at BetOnline and Bookmaker, at least as far as the offshore market goes. Certainly, as you know, shop around for the best prices wherever your jurisdiction is. But you've got a UCLA team here at 1-5 on the season, coming off of some extra prep time, though. A Stanford team that, look, week in and week out, we don't know what we're going to get from them. They're bad enough to get blown out by some teams. They're good enough to beat Washington. What do you think about this Thursday night game here in the Pac-12?
I think that's just really the Pac-12 now. Now you don't know what you're going to get. It kind of reminds me of that a few years ago, and it's probably going to apply this year in the Coastal Division of the ACC, that ACC Wheel of Destiny, where a team wins one week and then looks like the worst team in the conference the next week. So I think that's a little bit what you're seeing here. And look, Stanford got a nice win over Washington, and really it was probably a wider margin than the final score indicated at 23-13. They really probably should have beat them by more. Washington was just poor. And then you saw them get bet against. A lot of support for Arizona last week, and Washington pretty much controlled the game and easily covered the point spread. But I think that may be what you see here with UCLA, and there's still some 7s out there as well. I think having that week off, I don't think UCLA has really been that bad. They were in that competitive game against Arizona that could have went their way, and just happened to go Arizona's way. I don't think that they're that bad now. Thompson Robinson is questionable, but I thought that backup for UCLA did a solid job. And Stanford, of course, is still without Costello. I don't necessarily think that win over Washington is a real buy sign, to be honest with you. I just think it's got the product of the parity, or if you will, in the Pac-12, that no one is really that great. Maybe Oregon is pretty good, and they've been blowing out some teams. So maybe Oregon and Utah are still kind of look like I guess what you would say are the clear 2 best teams. But that's just what it's going to be really in the Pac-12. You're going to see Arizona, like when you had Arizona State lose at home to Colorado, and then the next week they go win at Cal. And I just think that that's what you're going to get here. So 7 seemed a little high here for me.
Well, of course, we'll find out about Oregon here this week when they go up to Seattle and take on Washington. A few other games that are kind of on your radar here this week. Game 321, 322, Clemson is at Louisville. A lot of people like Louisville here of late. Scott Satterfield doing a great job with the offense. They're fully invested. They're fully engaged. You can kind of see that play out where they've been a pretty good team here so far this year. You're kind of interested in laying the number, though.
Well, I mean, I'm more interested in the under, to be honest with you. And it's at 60.5. There might be a 61 out there because I'm not sure what we're going to have with Louisville's quarterback. Puma Pass has been out for a few weeks with a foot injury, and then they went with Mikhail Cunningham. He went out of the game last week. They were playing two quarterbacks, so Evan Conley, the true freshman, got a lot of the work and did a pretty solid job in that absolute score fest in a shootout at Wake Forest last week, where I think that was like the second highest scoring game in ACC history, 65-62, I believe was the final score. And if Conley is a go, you now have a Clemson team that does have him on film and can be fully prepared for it. And look, Clemson really held Florida State under. It got a little scary at the end because Florida State got a couple cosmetic scores, but they were up 42-0 in the third quarter and took Lawrence and ATN and some of the starters out. Really, what's been carrying the team, I mean, I don't think Trevor Lawrence has been bad, but he hasn't put up the dominant numbers that like Tua or Justin Fields have put up at Alabama and Ohio State, respectively. So the offense is still pretty darn good, but the defense, that's what's been surprising to me is the fact that, look, you get Clemson with three defensive starters just on the defensive line get drafted in the first round of the NFL draft in the spring, and we've seen how that's affected Mississippi State as their defense has really taken kind of a bit of a nosedive this season. But at Clemson, they don't really rebuild, they reload on defense, and that's exactly what they've done. They're third in total defense, only allowing about 255 yards a game. They're second in passing yards allowed, only allowing 150 yards a game. And then the scoring defense tied for sixth, only giving up an average of 12 points per game. So I would lean more toward the under. I think, look, Clemson, you assume they're going to get their 40 points and whatnot. But and I think this total got a little inflated on the opener too last year because people remember that Clemson put up 77 on Louisville last year. It was 77-16. Bobby Petrino was going to be well on his way out. That was probably what I think convinced Louisville to go ahead and cut bait and show him the door. But that I think plays into this total a little bit. But I think that look, Louisville at least has a pulse and at least is competitive. So I don't think that they're rolling over and kind of quitting like they did last year against Clemson. And then you had a Clemson that was playing with a bit of a sense of urgency in terms of running up some scores, and they could certainly do that here. But I'm a little more interested in the under. When I made my numbers, I had this total of like 54. So thought that there was a little high, and that's the side I would lean to here.
My mistake here. I do see in the notes that you mentioned Clemson under as opposed to the Clemson side. So my mistake there, and I think you're on the right track with all your thoughts on that game. Couple other side plays I want to take a look at here, and this is one that interests me actually too. So I want to get your take on it. 389, 390, Baylor and Oklahoma State. This line's now up to 3.5 out there in the market, and even some fours starting to show up. You like the Oklahoma State side here, and I'm with you on this one.
Yeah, I do, and I mean, you could always lay money line too if you're worried about if you might.
Let me stop you for a second, real quick, because you've been talking a lot about those short money lines lately in the 3.5 type of range. What's the thought process there?
Yeah, I mean, if you just miss a key number, and I like the spot anyway, and I don't think that number, if you don't get 3, is necessarily as bad as you would think in the NFL. I mean, where the numbers are a little bit tighter, so I don't think you necessarily have to worry. I mean, you obviously don't want to chase a bad number anywhere, but I don't think that you have to worry if you necessarily miss the 3 on this game. So if you want to lay the short favorite money line, which I think would probably be around, if it's around 3, it's usually around $1.65, $1.70, or somewhere around there. But you look at the Oklahoma State side here, and look, this offense is always good. It doesn't matter who plays quarterback really for Mike Gundy and company. They're 8th in the country in total offense, averaging about 528 yards a game. Rushing offense is ranked 7th. So they've tried to be a little bit more balanced. They're averaging about 40 points a game. The defense is not great, but not a total disaster. We've seen some bad defenses at Oklahoma State, and this is kind of just par for the course. They're in a lot of high-scoring games, and that's also probably the product of the Big 12 rather. But look, Baylor was life and death last week. They got ranked, and usually, like when a team gets ranked, when they're out of the top 25, but they're in that also receiving votes category, those are teams that I like to bet on because they know that they're close to being ranked and they still have a chip on their shoulder and they're still out to prove something. And that's what you saw with Baylor when they were able to go to Kansas State and win on the road, even though Kansas State took some money. I think Baylor ended up being a short favorite in that game. So they were able to easily win in Manhattan. Then last week, they did drop that touchdown that would have won them the game in regulation. And then, of course, go to overtime and eventually the second overtime. So that was one of the bad beats of the week, I guess, if you were on the under in that Baylor-Texas Tech game. But now they're getting into a test here. They're 6-0. This is probably the toughest game that they've played because the toughest team that they have played so far is Iowa State. Got them at home and almost blew the lead late, had to get a field goal in the final seconds to win the game. But now you get a little bit more of a test because Baylor's non-conference was fairly pedestrian. Stephen F. Austin, UTSA, Rice. So now you're going to an Oklahoma State team that's 4-2, kind of trying to stay in the race because they don't have divisions in the Big 12 like the other conferences. So it's essentially the top 2 teams. So a lot of these teams are still live for that second spot, assuming Oklahoma is going to get one of those spots because they clearly look like the best team in the conference. But I think Baylor has put up some good numbers. And look, I think Matt Rule's done a good job, but Baylor has put up some numbers against a little bit lesser competition. And I think they take a step up in class here. So I would lay the short price with the Cowboys.
I agree with everything you said, and also I bumped Oklahoma State up in my power ratings earlier on in the year. I've got this one closer to a touchdown, so I think Oklahoma State definitely the side here in this one. One more game I want to take a look at here on the college side, just because I think this one's interesting and maybe a game that won't get a whole lot of play. 405, 406, Louisiana Monroe and Appalachian State. App State, of course, on extra prep time coming off that win last Wednesday against Louisiana, formerly known as Louisiana Lafayette. App State's more than a 2-touchdown favorite here, though, and you've got some interest in the dog.
I do, and I thought that this was a little bit high, not a huge price discrepancy, but Appalachian State, I think the class of the Sun Belt, they were the best team last year, and they look like the best team this year, and they really impressed me, actually, going to Lafayette, I think it was last Wednesday night, and only holding them to 7 points. That's a really explosive offense they got down there, and Appalachian State was able to kind of slow down the game and make it a grinder game and grind out first downs when it looks like Lafayette would have them off the field and just win ugly, I guess, if you will, or win very conventional. But now they're ranked in the top 25, and that's what I talked about. These teams that are outside of the top 25, they really play well because they're fighting for that respectability and they want that national recognition. Now they finally have it. They're already considered the top team in the league, and rightfully so. But when you get that ranking next to your name, you become a little bit, there's even more of a target on your back, I guess. And I think that's what it is with Appalachian State. All of a sudden, the stakes become bigger for their opponents. It's not just about getting into the conference championship game or winning a division. You've now got a chance to beat a ranked team. And Louisiana Monroe, look, they've played some really tough competition. And I think one of the reasons this line is so high is if you recall a few weeks ago, they played at Iowa State, and it was a relatively competitive game for a half. And then it really got out of control. They ended up losing 72-20 at Iowa State. So that's a very ugly score. and people remember that, and that of course gets priced in the line. This team also almost beat Florida State in overtime in Tallahassee. I know Florida State's not great, but that's still would have been a big win if you were Louisiana Monroe. And instead of going for two, they kicked the extra point, which of course was blocked, and then they lose by one there. They were covering against Memphis. Memphis got a real late cover down there at Louisiana Monroe. So they've played a lot of tougher competition. And Appalachian State, I know, played at North Carolina and got the win, but I think they've played a little bit easier of a schedule. Monroe has the top 30 offense nationally. Now their defense is ranked very low, largely because those numbers get skewed, because when you give up 72 points and close to 700 yards to Iowa State, but I think that was at least a small outlier here. And you get an Appalachian State team that's now kind of feeling themselves a little bit, and the fact that they're now ranked. The offense is still, especially on the ground, is still pretty solid. Keep in mind they got a new coach with Satterfield now in Louisville. They got Elijah Drinkwitz, who is the OC and the quarterback coach at NC State, who also calls his own plays and serves as his own offensive coordinator in Boone. But now they're feeling themselves a little bit. Last year they were a top 10 in terms of the statistics, national defense. This year it slipped. They're in about the mid-60s. I mean, look, they gave up 37 to Coastal Carolina. They gave up 41 to Charlotte. These are teams that are relatively new to FBS football, have only been up for like a couple years. I think this may be the first or second year for Coastal Carolina. But, yeah, I just thought that maybe as like a real big favorite like this, you can find a little value going against them. And now you're seeing you saw it drop earlier in the week, but now you've got Monroe, I think about 15 or 15 and a half. And I think they're worth a shot here over a perhaps fat and happy Appalachian State club.
Yeah, I got this line 15 in my power ratings, but for all the reasons you mentioned, I'm pretty interested in Monroe here this week. I had Monroe against Memphis a couple weeks ago. That was a 68-yard touchdown run and a pick six on back-to-back plays that turned that into a Memphis cover. And like I said, I had the Warhawks there in that one. So maybe looking to go back on the Warhawks here in this one this week. We'll transition over to the NFL side here to finish out the segment. And 463-464, I think, is a real compelling game between the Rams and the Falcons. I guess maybe not a compelling game, but a compelling handicap with two teams going very clearly in the wrong direction here. McVay is completely safe. We know that. Dan Quinn will get fired, whether it's during the season or after the season, unless something really dramatically changes here for the Falcons. What are you thinking about this early kickoff here in the Dome down in Atlanta?
Yeah, and I would be leaning to Atlanta here. If you recall, last week, I mean, Matt Ryan threw for, I think, 360 yards and 4 touchdowns, high completion. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but did the job, didn't throw a pick, and they still found a way to lose. And it's kind of maybe a little bit more of a fate of the Rams, because I was really disappointed with that team last week, and I was wrong on that handicap, because I thought that they were going to get the 49ers in that spot. And credit to the 49ers. I mean, they're proving that they're for real, especially that defense. That defense absolutely pounded the Rams' offensive line, and their offensive line really pounded the Rams' defensive line. That's what really shocked me, was how easily the 49ers won that game in the trenches against the Rams. And look, Atlanta has got some offensive line issues. They've had a bunch of guys hurt. They've had to do a lot of reshuffling, but it's more of a play on a team where I don't think that the other team, even with Aaron Donald on that defensive line, that I don't know if the other team can really exploit their offensive line issues. And the power ratings are going to all say Rams, and I think people will bet on the fact that maybe, hey, going on the road here gets them refocused, and perhaps they're right. But as of this time, I would lean to the Atlanta side. I couldn't really have the confidence in the Rams here, even as such short road favorites.
I gotta say, I know you and I both go through the contest struggle week in and week out. I do not like this card at all. You've got a lot of teams just going in the wrong direction here, whether they're short favorites or short dogs. You've got some teams that are a mess going head to head, like the Chargers and the Titans. I don't know how Chicago looks coming off the bye. I know everybody wants to fade Bridgewater, but all he's done is beat everybody the last 3 weeks. This is not a particularly great card. And when you look at kind of a game that sort of embodies that, Baltimore and Seattle here, game 469, 470, a game where I don't really know what to do here, but it seems like you've got a lean that you do like early in the week.
Yeah, and you're so right. Just getting back before we get to the game, getting back to what you're saying in terms of finding these plays, because we wonder, look, NFL underdogs are now 53, 36, and 2 against the spread this season. That's just overall underdogs. That doesn't decide whether it's home or away or what have you. And they were 10-4 last week. And you keep wondering when maybe, because usually that's going to regress. I mean, at least a little bit to the mean. So you're wondering which week that's going to come, if it's going to come this week or next week. But back to this situation, yeah, I do like the Ravens if you're getting 3 in the hook or even a little bit more here. Seattle, I thought, I mean, they weren't really outstatted in Cleveland, but I thought they got kind of fortunate to win that game. They got some breaks. Cleveland, I think, made some mistakes, maybe some questionable decision-making from Freddie Kitchens, or as my recent colleague Matt Humans calls him, Larry the Cable Guy, as a coach for the Cleveland Browns. And he made some errors, but I mean, I thought Cleveland could have put that game away early, and they kind of let Seattle hang around a little bit, took some bad penalties. And look, credit to Seattle. They got the win, but I think that they're a solid team, but I don't think that they're necessarily an elite team. I think they have that 5-1 record. I think that they're a team that's caught some breaks. So that's why I was maybe looking a little bit more at the Baltimore side. And look, Baltimore has not been impressive after those first couple of weeks. They get a win in Pittsburgh, in overtime, where Pittsburgh probably should have won the game, but didn't. They don't cover against Cincinnati, even though Cincinnati did backdoor. I think Lamar Jackson has shown that he's a second-year quarterback. I think those games that we saw the first couple weeks where he put up these stupid numbers were like, okay, he's here, like he's fully developed now, but he's not. I mean, he's still a second-year quarterback, so he's still going to go through some ups and downs and miss some easy throws and not make the reads quickly enough. I do think he's improved, but this is still a work in progress. But a lot of the talk in the media, and that's kind of one thing I use in the NFL, where you can kind of fade the media at times, and you're hearing all the talk, and I think it's rightful talk because I think he's been very good, but all the media refrain this week is Russell Wilson is the MVP. Russell Wilson is the MVP. That's all you've heard on the national talk shows all week in terms of one of the main topics of reference in terms of discussing the weekend that is in the NFL. So I think you're getting a decent dog here. And look, when you look at this line, that it's 3.5, when you judge home field advantage, Adam, I have Seattle ranked as one of the highest home fields in the league. If the default home field advantage is 3, and we know some are less, Miami, Jacksonville, Tampa, places like that, maybe their home field is 1.5 or 2. But that means there's some home fields that are 4, 4.5, or 5. And I think Seattle would fall in that category, yet they're only laying 3.5 here. So that tells you that I think that the marketplace and the odds makers kind of value Baltimore and Seattle in the same way, and really put those as even teams on a neutral field. So they're not necessarily buying Seattle, and I'm not necessarily either long term.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think it's really important to look at NFL games in that way too, especially ones where there is a well-defined home field advantage, and there definitely is one here in this game between Baltimore and Seattle. Wes Reynolds is working and fine on Twitter at Wes Reynolds, the number 1, also regularly on VSiN and in the Point Spread Weekly newsletter. I know there was a schedule change this week, so you're going to be on tonight, but when else can people find you on VSiN?
Yeah, we'll be on tonight from 6 to 10 Pacific time, 9 to 1 Eastern if you're a night owl, with myself and Brady Cannon. And then tomorrow we do the same, 6 to 10 Pacific time tomorrow and Friday. Myself, Brady Cannon, Amal Shaw. And then with the baseball playoffs, now probably not tonight because the game got postponed, but we've been having former big leaguer Josh Towers, who pitched in the major leagues for several years, appears on the shows, especially during these baseball playoff games. And I think he has interesting insights because he looks at things differently, obviously, as a player that maybe bettors can really learn from in terms of what decisions a manager is making, how a player is pitching, how he's being called at the plate by an umpire. So he has some interesting insights that I think you can only get from a player. And then over the weekend, 2 to 6 Pacific time on Saturday, kind of in that middle, stretching into the late window of college football games, and 3 to 7 on Sunday for NFL Sunday.
Well, make sure you follow Wes on Twitter again, at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Wes, appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, Adam. Thanks, bud.